with a random sample, we won't have some of those biases, and I was expecting the BW numbers to be lower, and you'll see in a moment what they ended up being. I just wanted to tell you that we were careful about our sampling procedures. The students had to have already completed a full semester at BW, so anybody with less than 12 credit hours from BW was excluded. And of course, we also excluded some other groups. So if a student was pregnant, if they're working on weight loss or had special dietary restrictions, they were excluded. Excuse me. All right, so the primary dependent variable in our survey came from the USDA, and this is the standard measure that is being used in these national surveys of college students. So we didn't make the items up, right? They came from the USDA. And there's 6 questions in this scale, and it's about whether they were positive or negative responses. So if the students responded that they, yes to these instances of food insecurity 6 of 6 times, that was very low food security. And if they said yes 3 to 5 times, that would be low food insecurity. And that's that combination of 3 to 6 that USDA defines as food insecure. Okay, so 6 is the yellow, the 10%. So you have 10% of BW students had very low food insecurity. Again, that meant they said yes to all 6 questions. And then low food insecurity was 3 to 5. So combined, using USDA definition, 27% of the BW student body was food insecure in the fall of 2017. So looking at some of our independent variables, we did find that students who were self-identified and one of the racial minority groups were more food insecure than Euro-American students. So 23% of Caucasians and 42% of racial minorities were food insecure. Both of those numbers are large, right? Larger than we'd like to see. Students living off campus had a higher likelihood of being food insecure than those on campus. And we didn't find any differences for marital status and number of children and student status. We were thinking the literature did find statistical significance for dependence and student status, but we did not find that. Okay, so this is data from Baldwin Wallace students about how their experience of hunger impacted their academic and collegiate experience at Baldwin Wallace. So you can see there over 45% of the students who didn't identify, right? If the instrument showed that they were food insecure, we looked at that group, honed in on them, and almost half of them said that they performed poorly on a test or assignment because of hunger. Some were skipping co-curricular activities, experiences of being physically uncomfortable, sometimes missing class or missing a lab. All right, so what about the ability to study and concentrate? So if we look at, again, this is the 55 students in the sample who that USDA measure identified as food insecure. So for these, and there was one missing for the independent variable. So really we're looking at 54 students. So of those who were food insecure, a third said that they sometimes or often had a difficult time studying because they were hungry. And they were hungry because they had no money for food. We looked at a few others in terms of, the impact on their health related to being food insecure, and this is pretty telling here. I'm sorry, the font's not so good. So while at BW, have you had to choose the cheapest food over balanced meals? So you can see that half. So I'm sorry, this is food secure students and food insecure students. So if you read across, you compare food secure to food insecure, right? So how often have you had to choose the cheapest food over balanced meals? If you look at the often, right, of the food secure students, 8.7% said that they had to choose cheapest food, whereas 50% of those food insecure said, and the numbers are pretty similar if we switch over to, this recognition that they were eating food that they knew wasn't healthy. And you can see similar numbers in the right-hand column. 10% for those who are food insecure, and 42% for food insecure said they often ate food that they knew was not healthy. Okay, so the literature talks about, other forms of insecurity. So housing and educational expenses, books. So of the students who were food insecure, right, how many of them had to choose between books for class or for food, and that was over a quarter. How many chose between other educational expenses and food? So that was 44%. And, that story that we heard from Wendy, right, from her plate project, paying for rent or food, and that was 22% of those students. We found a fair amount of caring in our caring community. There were some questions here about not their own experiences of food insecurity, but actions that they've engaged to support other people. So there was a survey question on there, and this came right from the plate project. How often have you assisted someone who lacked the resources to purchase a meal? So this is the entire sample. And you can see there that about 41% of the students I'm sorry, I read that wrong. No, 41% of the students often or sometimes purchase meals for others. A few of our questions were about education processes, and people did say, some people were open to learning about how to budget better and were interested in learning how to eat healthy on a budget. So big picture, it's not an uncommon occurrence. We like to think at BW, that our students are all well and fine and they look healthy when we look at them. But, sadly, we do have about 27% of our students are food insecure. And if anything, that number might be higher this fall during this pandemic as we have widespread economic insecurity. And that this affects, it's a social justice issue, but also impacts their educational performance and persistence. So I think Christy's going to focus more on solutions, but this is what our students said in fall of 2017. We do need to do a better job of informing students about food assistance programs that already exist in the community, such as SNAP and local food banks. We might make a difference by helping to educate students on budgeting and how to eat healthy on a budget. We tried to run some focus groups. It didn't work very well. We used the survey instrument to try to recruit people who were food insecure, but I think the stigma is so high without knowing the individuals behind the study, we didn't get much participation. However, we did have a few students come, and they said in those focus groups, when we gave them a definition of a shared meal app and a Swipe Out Hunger app, the students all said they would definitely use these opportunities. All right, and a task force working on food recovery. And so I think that's a good place to bounce it back to Christy.
Thanks so much, Jill, and thanks for all your work on this. And Jill has continued to be involved in these conversations as we've moved even beyond the research study. We have been talking together about redoing the study now that the meal plan has changed, to see if that has impacted numbers, if that has impacted. We have even heard narratives of students choosing to live off campus so they don't have to buy a meal plan now. If you'll remember in the past, the money that the students did not spend from their meal plan, they actually got back. And that no longer happens. And I know a lot of our students had shared during that process as they were announcing these changes that they really depended on that money for various things. And so we're very curious to see how the new meal plan impacts. The fact that it's all you can eat, though, could have other surprising impacts that may have reduced food insecurity for some students who are able to access a meal plan. So we're not quite sure what we might find, but we do have plans at some point to do that study again. Some concern about doing it right now because people may feel that the COVID context influences the data that we find. And so we'll see where we take that. But Jill, I think it's going to stick around, and if folks have more questions about the data that was done in 2018, certainly can answer those questions. So I want to share a little more about what was kind of in action, what was already being worked on, and then we can talk about looking ahead to this upcoming year. So you'll see a couple different things on your screen. Some of you were familiar with the national program called the Campus Kitchens Project. This was a national project which worked to recover food from college campuses that was then repurposed out into the community to serve community members who needed a meal. So you've all been to campus events pre-COVID, right, and seen the amount of food that was left over. So the Campus Kitchen Project empowered students to recover that food, safe food, of course, and we actually served our food at a local senior residence right on Bagley Road, Coreytown Apartments. So we had a monthly meal there and had built a great relationship there. The Campus Kitchens Project is actually transitioning now into the Food Recovery Network, which is a similar mission, recovering perfectly good food that would normally go to waste from college campuses. A part of that initiative, food recovery became kind of a central focus for us, was also thinking about how could we use food from events to serve students on campus who needed a meal. So two efforts that came up from that was the Campus Fridge Program. So Robin Gagnow gave me a call one day and said, I have all these refrigerators that we can't use anymore from Residence Life. Do you need them? These are the kind of calls we get in the Brain Center every day. And I said, yes, we will figure out a way to use them. And so what we did is we distributed those refrigerators around to different offices on campus that we knew potentially had access to students who may be experiencing food insecurity. So the Commuter Lounge, Veteran Services, the Center for Inclusion, and I'm forgetting our fourth location. And we were exploring other locations as well. And the idea was we did a big food safety training. We trained volunteers to be able to recover food to put in those fridges, and students would know that they had access to the food that was there. As you can imagine, this is an incredibly tedious process, documenting the food, ensuring it's transported safely, and ensuring that it's monitored so that you don't have food just sitting and rotting in fridges. So it was quite an effort, and I can't say it was necessarily up and running at a robust level, but at least we had the infrastructure there to get started. We were also working with Dr. Brian Krupp, who I think is in the call today. So hi, Brian. He had an awesome team of students who were working on a food recovery app for us. So basically, if you're hosting an event and you know that you're going to have, 15 pizzas that haven't even been touched yet left over, you could go onto your app, you could post that you've got pizza left over in the SIG, and students could choose to come and pick up that pizza then. It was also going to be a way to promote free events that had free food. So an opportunity to get students to events as well, not just for the food, but for the actual quality of the event. As you can imagine, both of these efforts have been shut down now due to COVID restrictions, but we will see. There's still possibilities for them in the future, and we hope that these are things we can continue working on once we're able to be less than 6 feet apart again. So some other efforts that were underway, even as recently as the beginning of this spring, we had a really active group of LHE graduate students who were engaged in the Brain Center last year. I came back from maternity leave around November, and I think it was the day I got back, there was a group at my door like, we're ready. We want to tackle food insecurity. We want to figure out what we can do. Terry, who's on this call, was from Otterbein, and Otterbein has a robust food pantry and student aid program called the Promise House. And so it was kind of this culmination of energy and ideas coming together. We started a student resource program task force at the end of last fall, going into the beginning of the spring. This group of students and faculty and staff did a campus listening tour. So many of you may have been involved in that. They went around and talked to faculty and staff and different resource offices on campus. And we learned about all kinds of things that we didn't even know existed. People who had essentially small food pantries in their offices. The conservatory has a closet of school supplies that students know that they can access if they need something. The library was exploring starting a food shelf there in the library. So a lot of pockets of things that were already happening but weren't necessarily connected to any larger efforts. And what we also heard was a lot of stories that people had heard from students who were struggling. And so it just reconfirmed this notion that we have a lot of work to do. So one team was focused on on-campus efforts, and the other team was focused on learning what other campuses are doing, what's working, what's not working, things like that. And so we visited Promise House. We actually visited Otterbein, I think 10 days before everything shut down. So it's kind of wild how the timing all worked out. But from all of this work that these graduate students did, and then the staff and faculty that were involved, we were able to take all that data and we were able to apply for an Americorps position, which we got funded from Americorps and from Ohio Campus Compact. And we now have an Americorps member in our office in the Brain Center this year who is going to be dedicated to working on food insecurity resources and other resources to help students who have financial barriers to success here at BW. And we're also looking at developing other sustained resources beyond a food pantry. So there's a documentary that we watched that I'll share with you in a little bit here. And in that documentary, it's called Hungry to Learn. It documents the stories of college students who are experiencing food insecurity. And there's a mom in that documentary who says, you know, I've been touring all these college campuses this year, and everybody is showing off their food pantries. And she said, that is just not something I think a campus should be proud of, right? If you're supporting your students, if you're providing resources, if you're admitting them here, shouldn't we have the infrastructure to support them in their needs beyond a food pantry? And so it's kind of an interesting perspective. There's a lot of pro-food pantry movement in this work, and then there's a lot of folks who say we need more sustained solutions, which we'll talk a little bit about here. So then everything changed, right? COVID hits, campus shuts down. We put a halt on all of our programming and initiatives. We have very close connections to the Cleveland Food Bank because of our work with Campus Kitchens. The Brain Center is actually an agency of the Cleveland Food Bank. And we have a lot of alumni who also are working there. So we hear a lot from them. And it's been amazing. They have experienced, as of July, which this number has gone up since then, 26,000 new families accessing services there. Their weekly meal distributions are the largest that they've ever seen. And our students were no exception to this, right? So our students and their families, as Jill has mentioned previously, are definitely being impacted. So when everything shut down, you know, this issue of food insecurity was already in the front of our minds here in the Brain Center. And we knew, we were hearing just from our own students who were losing jobs, losing internships, students who had just signed leases on houses and weren't sure now how they were going to pay for them, parents who were losing their jobs, all these things. And we just thought, gosh, we need to figure out something. How are we going to help these students? And so we had, through the process of research that had been happening in the spring, been exploring emergency aid programs. And so it was literally within a week, we were able to get a committee together, work with the development office, get some donors lined up, and we were able to fund an emergency grant fund through the months of April and May. And I want to be clear, this is totally separate from the COVID funding that we received from the government, right? This is just from BW donors, alumni, faculty and staff who contributed. So this grant fund rolled out to students. There was an application and review process. We have a committee of people who, you know, we walked through a clear rubric of kind of determining need and funding levels. We had nearly 200 applications. I'll say we had almost 100 applications in the first 48 hours alone. We ended up funding 145 students. I will say the applications that weren't funded was primarily because they were just requesting things that weren't fundable through this program. Many of those were requesting tuition dollars, which we weren't funding tuition, or paying off a credit card, which wasn't fundable through this. We were looking at funding basic needs, food, housing, things like that. So just over $16,000 in grants were funded to these students, and each student got a personal outreach from either myself or Julie, and we connected them to a community resource guide to help them figure out wherever they were, whether they were in Ohio, whether they were in Cleveland, what community resources were available for them based on what their needs were. So you can see here, this is directly from the application data for this program. Emergency food and grocery needs was the #1 request by far. We had students saying, you know, we've got 6 kids back at home with my one mom who is no longer working, and we're eating 1 meal a day, trying to figure out what to do. You know, so like I said, students who are living off campus, who had rent to pay and no longer had their on-campus employment or their summer internships lined up, things like that. About 65% of the students who were funded through this process were Pell eligible. So that was something that we learned this summer. We shut down the program when the COVID dollars came in, just simply because there was too much confusion around which was which. And so at this point, we have not reopened the emergency grant fund. We are retooling it to figure out what the criteria is going to be and what those priority areas of need are going to be. Certainly food will still be one of those priority areas. But an announcement will go out to campus as soon as the program reopens, and we are looking for more funding for it as well. So this is a program we hope to continue even beyond COVID. There was a big study that Kent State was a part of probably about 5 or 6 years ago, where there was a pot of money and schools had this money that they could use to try to increase retention. And so some campuses used that money to fund these big elaborate retention programs and things like that. And I believe it was Kent State, they gave out small mini grants and like, $200, $400, students whose cars broke down and it prevented them from getting to campus, or who had these small minor medical bills, but it was causing them, this great financial burden. And what they found is those small grants actually resulted in a higher increase in retention and persistence in school than some of those big elaborate programs did. And so we're not sure, the average grant through this program was about $150. But for those students, that may have been just enough to purchase groceries or, just to give them a bump to get through the next week or so. So we will continue doing more research into this. And if you're interested in being involved, certainly reach out. This is a new initiative for us. For those who are involved, we were kind of building the plane as we flew it because it emerged so quickly, but something that we plan to continue. You may be aware that there was a survey that went out to all students over the summer. It was a national survey called the COVID-19 Institutional Response Survey. So BW was able to get some data from, it was about 700, I think you can see on here, close to 730 students who completed it. One of the questions was, as a result of COVID-19, how often do you worry about having enough to eat day to day? And you can see here the numbers, and sometimes often and very often. And then concern about paying bills is certainly elevated here for our students. And so just something to be aware of as we're entering our classroom spaces and programs, that things have changed dramatically for many of our students. One other kind of note that I would share is through the emergency grant program, some of the phone calls that I made to students, there were some students who said, I've been to a food bank before, I'm familiar with the process, I'm good. But there was other students who said, I never thought I would ever have to call a food bank, right? Or, they were just struggling to figure out where the closest food meal program was for their family and things like that. They'd never had to think about it before. And so students across the board are being impacted, by this right now. So again, just reiterating, so many of our students were already financially vulnerable and now are really struggling as a result of COVID. Jill already hit on some of these kind of impacts. So the things that we could be seeing in our classes, that it may not just be students who are up late partying, right? It might be that they're hungry, or that they've, been trying to figure out, finances and things like that. So one of the challenges that we faced, and this is something that the task force realized as we got started, there are so many different paths that could lead a student to being food insecure, whether it's a job loss or an underpaying job, or we're always encouraging students to take on internships, and many of those internships may be unpaid, although I know we're trying to change that. One unexpected medical expense. We all know, how dramatically that can impact our expense or our finances. The loss of a scholarship or the reduction of a scholarship can tremendously impact a student's ability to pay for school. And so and these are just three, right? There's many, infinitely more reasons that a student may be facing food insecurity. And because there's so many paths that can lead them here, there's not one strategy that's going to be this miraculous fix for all students. Some students are facing a very, short-term need, where a food pantry may be the best fit for them. Whereas others, this is something they're going to need to figure out for the length and duration of their time here at BW. And so we are trying to think across all of those areas in terms of the solutions that we're able to provide. All right, so I've already mentioned Taylor. Taylor is our fantastic new Americorps member. She is an LHE graduate student here. She is part-time in our space. She also works in residence life. And so she's got a big job ahead of her. She's going to be working to create kind of an intake process. So if you identify students in your classes or advisees who are struggling, even at this point, feel free to refer them to Taylor, refer them to me. I can make that connection. And we are going to help them connect not only to financial aid, right? So we don't want to cut the ties with our BW resources. So financial aid, counseling and health services, and other resources that we already have, we will continue to strengthen those relationships and help students think about how to navigate, and advocate for themselves in those processes. But Taylor will also work to connect them to local resources that may be able to support them with whatever it is they're struggling with. Again, connecting to financial aid, providing financial management resources, and then developing some programs. So whether it's food pantries, whether it's looking at this idea of a food scholarship, or other campus community partnerships that we can look at. Jill already mentioned, K through 12, we have meal programs. Many people don't bat an eye at those anymore. We recognize the value, we recognize the impact. And then all of a sudden, students who have been a part of those programs their whole educational career, they come to college and there's no more supports available. So we're looking at how we can advocate for more things related to that. And then student workshops. This may be a space where you have an interest in contributing as well. So cooking on a budget, advocacy for your own financial needs, and understanding student debt. It is scary at the end of the year when my students are sitting in the office and they're getting their final review of all their financial aid and their student loans and what that's going to look like on a month-to-month basis. They're shocked. They have no idea. They don't understand necessarily the long-term impacts of those financial choices. And so working with students to ensure that they're making good choices now that will not harm them in the long run. So that's Taylor. I don't see that she's on here. I don't know if she was able to log on, but we will make sure that she has a chance to connect with folks. And like I said, feel free to email me. She's going to have a web page and everything developed. At this point, this is her second week in this role, so we don't have those things up and running just yet. But I think we're going to see a lot coming out of her work this year. The other exciting thing is the work of a student leader. Her name is Erin Neff. Many of you may know her. And Erin was also a part of our Brain Student Fellowship. So the Brain Student Fellowship is what Wendy was a part of when she launched her plate project. Erin was a part of our fellowship and knew she wanted to focus on food insecurity as well. And so she did a lot of research and talked to a lot of other campuses about how they were addressing food insecurity and learned about this program called Swipe Out Hunger. It's kind of another one of those programs that you go, oh, duh, this makes so much sense. So basically what it is students who are part of this program, whose campus is a part of this program, if you have swipes left on your meal plan, you can donate those swipes to this program, and then those swipes can be allocated out to students in need. So if you're a student who needs a meal, you can go in and apply and receive swipes. It's nice because all you need is your Jacket Express. You don't get some special voucher. You don't have to, wear something that makes you stand out when you're checking out. It's just your card. And so no one has to know how you access those meal swipes or the meal plan. And then if you're a student who maybe isn't utilizing your meal plan fully, you're able to then donate those and know that those swipes aren't going to go to waste. At this point, it was supposed to launch this fall. As you can imagine, things have changed dramatically. And so we actually have our next meeting on Friday, working to figure out exactly how this is going to roll out for the semester. We were approved for students to be able to donate their guest swipes at this point. And so we're hoping that over time, as the program proves itself, we can increase access to allowing students to donate more than just their guest swipes. But at this point, we're happy to have anything available. There will also be options for us as faculty and staff to contribute directly to this program. So if you just want to make a donation, you can certainly do that as well. Again, that process isn't set up just yet. We're still waiting for approval from a variety of different pieces. But this is just kind of a sneak peek that this is coming. And in terms of good infrastructure and kind of working against that stigma that there is when you're thinking about addressing food insecurity, this is a great program that has proven to be very successful on other campuses. So just some other ideas in terms of faculty and staff support. The Hope Center for College Community and Justice is based out of Temple University. They are an incredible resource, and they are leading the way right now in terms of research and advocacy for students, not only with food insecurity, but housing insecurity and all kinds of other financial barriers. And so they provide this statement here. This is a syllabus statement that you could consider including in your syllabus. It could be specific to food insecurity, or it could be any kind of financial barrier. But the main thing with this is just letting students know that you're a resource, and it's kind of normalizing this conversation about food insecurity so that a student who is struggling doesn't feel like they're probably the only one who's ever faced this, right? By you mentioning that first day of class, hey, by the way, you know, we know there's a lot going on in the world right now. If you're having trouble getting groceries or finding sufficient food to eat, if you don't have a safe place to live, you can encourage them to contact financial aid, certainly, to see if there's any work that can be done with their individual financial aid package. They can contact us in the Brain Center, and we will connect them to Taylor and the resources within that resource center. And you can also say, you know, reach out to me if you're comfortable as a faculty member to be able to connect them. So again, that's just kind of normalizing this conversation and opening that door for conversation. Consider talking to students during an advising appointment. This is a cool idea that came out from the task force earlier in the spring semester. You know, it's kind of like when you go to the doctor and there's these questions that you get about safety at home. Do you have enough food to eat? You know, these have just become kind of standard questions now. Not to, you know, some people will be comfortable with this and some people totally will not. And so this is your own preference. This was just an idea that's out there. But, you know, just bringing it up to all students so that, you know, again, it's normalizing that conversation, opening the door. You might even have a student who says, no, I'm fine. But then they come back to you and say, you know what, actually, you know, you kind of caught me off guard, but I'm actually not fine. And I really don't know where I'm going to get, you know, my next meal or whatever it might be. I've always been surprised. I worked with a campus kitchen program at another institution prior to BW, and we actually learned that students were coming to volunteer with that program because they needed a meal. So the meal's mission was to serve community meals, right, out to the community. But we had students coming because they themselves were hungry. But it was because we had started those conversations that students felt comfortable talking to us about that. So stay tuned for opportunities with Swipe Out Hunger, both for you to promote that to your students and also if there's ways that you'd like to be contributing. There are campuses that have Swipe Out Hunger programs that include faculty and staff because just like COVID is impacting our students' families, we recognize that we have professional staff in our own community here that may be, you know, dramatically impacted as well. So if that's an area you're interested in exploring with us, certainly reach out and we can talk about that. And then kind of a different twist here, right? But thinking about curricular connections between your discipline and food insecurity. So, you know, I mentioned Brian Krupp earlier. You know, I don't know that food insecurity was necessarily high on the list of computer science curriculum, but we found some really interesting connections between how technology can actually be a tremendous resource for addressing that particular issue. So if you're interested in exploring how you can include whether it's a one-time, you know, conversation or lesson, or whether it's really baking it into a class that you teach. You know, Dr. Lombardi and I, our FYE class for 2 years was focused on food and activism. So there's lots of interesting connections that you can make. And that's my job, is to be here to help you find connections to partners, find projects that kind of bring that learning to life. So if there's interest there, don't hesitate to reach out and I'd be happy to explore that with you. I mentioned the Hungry to Learn documentary. We had a small group of folks who had been involved with this work previously who did a film screening and discussion group this summer with this film. And we plan to bring it to campus as a full campus opportunity at some point in the fall. We're kind of waiting for calendars to settle down a bit to figure out when the best time will be to do that. But I'll make sure that you get information about that and would love to have you join for that. Some additional resources, and this session is being recorded. I'm also more than happy to share these links and share my PowerPoint with you, but these are just some of the key studies that I pulled some of the data from. And then this book literally just came out within the last month. It just arrived on my desk about a week ago. So this is a new book that we plan to dig into. If you're interested, I'm more than happy to lend you a copy. And again, 2 other resources, the Hope Center and then the College and University Food Bank Alliance, have great research and great resources out there. Many of you will find your name on this list, and I apologize if I missed anyone, but these are folks who have been involved, whether it was in a class project, our task force, our listening tour, part of the emergency grant team. It's really been a great kind of cross-campus effort, and we appreciate everyone who's been a part of this. I put a note here on this final screen just in terms of resources. So we have already been hearing about students who don't have the resources to purchase hand sanitizers, thermometers, wipes, things like that. And so we are compiling a very small number. We're starting with like 100 of what, kind of like student wellness kits. They will have hand sanitizer, wipes, a mask, and a thermometer. We are not, unfortunately, able to do a big campus announcement about this because as we learned with the grants, when you do that, we're going to be inundated and we will not have the quantity that we need to support those types of requests. So we're doing this more as a referral program. So if you hear from students in your classes who do not have access to these materials, or you can say in your class, if you don't have access, let me know, because you can refer them to us and we will get them one of these kits to at least get them started as the semester begins. So that's just another resource that we're trying to get out right now. So I'm going to stop there and take a breath, and I'm actually going to turn off this PowerPoint. So if anybody has any questions, and I have seen there's a lot of chats going, so let me see here if I can go back and start addressing some of these. And feel free to unmute yourself if you have a question before I get to it in the chat. Yeah, so questions about pricing of the meal plan. Yeah, I was surprised when I did the math on that too, that there is kind of such a big difference between the meal plan if you break it down to a per meal cost. And I'm sure Lewis's economics framework there provides insights into why that may be. Let's see. Yeah, and the meal plan continues to change, right? And I don't have the data in terms of, I wanted to get data for today about how many students are in each of those plans. There is also a commuter plan, but it's very, very limited. And as I said before, we had heard of students choosing to live off campus because they didn't want a meal plan, but now we wonder how that's impacting them in terms of their food security.
Hey, Christy?
Yeah.
Can I ask you a question?
Please, yes.
Hi, my name is Sue, and I'm from the conservatory. Thanks for this presentation. I'm always wondering, so all this is wonderful for students who reach out and things like that, but I'm always thinking that there must be a huge population of students who are so proud and embarrassed to reach out, and there are so many number of people that just go without receiving help because of that factor. Do you have recommendations, or what do we do about that population? Because I mean, those are the populations that I worry even a little bit more because they're just struggling in silence.
Totally, and that's something that's highlighted in the documentary that we watched too. A student who was homeless, and nobody had any idea actually until they started working on the documentary. And so we're, as a part of Taylor's work with our Student Resource Center, we will be creating a student advisory team. And the hope is, if they're not comfortable talking to a faculty member, an advisor, a staff member, an employer, hearing their fellow peers talk about their experiences may open some of those channels of communication. We want to make sure we have events that are strictly student-led. Many of our events in the Brain Center are, but if they know it's just going to be students there and just students who are engaged in this topic, that may again open some doors. I can't say I have a grand solution there, but that's one of the at least intentional efforts that we're trying to make. And the other nice thing, actually, the interesting thing about COVID, the conversation Taylor and I had last week, is most of her intake appointments will be remote. And so a student will not have to walk into a space and say, hi, I'm here for the Student Resource Center, right? They can have a private online appointment with Taylor to talk about some of their questions and concerns, and no one ever has to know that. Taylor's office space is right here in the Brain Center. At least in pre-COVID days, students would come to the Brain Center for a million different things: to get involved, to volunteer, to have us sign their EXP paperwork. And so it's kind of a no shame space again. So if a student did come up here with questions related to that, it's not like anyone would know that's what they were here for. So that's another thing is a lot of campuses we talked to said the space that you choose is really important because especially if it's a food pantry, if that's all that there is there, someone's going to know that's why you're going there, and that may prevent people from choosing to go there. So we're trying to be very intentional as we think about that part of the design of this. So yeah, it's a great point.
Well, thanks for your work, and I'm looking forward to getting involved this year.
Thank you. Thanks for being here. I see some comments here about local meal programs like St. Thomas. And so we are working with Berea Community Outreach. There, we had a student a couple years ago who created a resource guide for local meal programs and things. So Taylor and her team will be updating that, and that will be another resource that we share with students as well, because there are a wealth of resources just even right off campus. So let's see. Yeah, impact of BW going remote. I don't know. I have a lot of students who are leaders in the Brain Center that I've talked to, who they are excited to be back on campus. They're nervous actually about going to class, but they're excited to be back on campus because they wanted to get out of wherever home is. For some of those students, I know the story, and some of them I don't know why, but I know that's the story that they tell. And so I think for some students, home is not a healthy place for them for whatever reason. So whether that's related to food insecurity or safety or whatever it might be, I do think going remote poses a challenge for many students. Not many, but some students, I would say. I don't know the data on that, but definitely something that we should be aware of. I've seen a lot of interesting things over the summer in terms of, should we require students to have their cameras on? Should we require just different things related to privacy, related to personal space? Students who, for a variety of reasons, don't want kind of wherever home is to be broadcast, all kinds of things like that. So just some interesting considerations. I don't know specifically the connections to food insecurity, but there's a lot of students just like K through 12 who depend on their meal plan for food. And how they finance that may be different than the finances they have available when they're not on campus. So I imagine that there is an impact there for sure. Oh, I see CSD has a food shelf. Great. Yeah, if you have resources in your office that I didn't mention, and maybe you don't think you were involved in that campus study or the listening tour, please feel free to send me that information. Taylor will be compiling information about on-campus resources for students. So yes, microgrants, effectiveness. Let's see. Great. Any other questions? Yes, and Terry pointed out Taylor is working in Res Life right now, so she is putting out a million different fires, I'm sure, with check-in process right now. So she wanted to be here, but I know she's swamped. Well, thank you all so much. Yeah, hi, Ellen.
Hi. If we wanted to put something on our syllabus, and yeah, I agree that I would love that wording, but should we also put how to make a booking appointment with Taylor specifically, or is that not something to put there?
Yes, that will be on there. So you can go ahead and list that, and they can go. So we're using the new BW platform bookings. I'm trying to think, if you go to our MyBW page, and you get to our MyBW page by searching community engagement, don't put in Brain Center. It doesn't know who we are. But if you put in community engagement, it'll take you to our page, and it's right on the front page there. You click the bookings link, and then there's a variety of options. And a meeting with Taylor will be one of those options. So I don't actually know if that's live yet because she hadn't started when we created that, but I will check today to make sure that option goes live. So
yeah, Christy, if there's a way that we could get that out to faculty, I mean, I haven't finalized or published my syllabus yet. Like,
sure.
I want to add this, and I want it to be as clear.
Sure.
Like, I could even put the link on it, right,
Mm-hmm.
to how to contact her. So I don't know if we could manage to pull that off in the next day or two, but
sure.
I would love to include that in my syllabi. I think.
So do you think
many
it's appropriate, Jill, is that appropriate for me just to send out to the faculty email?
Hell yeah.
Okay, you all heard it here.
Yes, I agree.
Okay. All right, I'll send out a statement and a link to booking.
Are you kidding me? All the unimportant emails I get? Like, this is important.
I'm very cognizant of inboxes these days. All right, I can definitely do that. Great question. Anything else that I may have missed in the chat box or other questions that you may have?
I have one quick question, Christy.
Yeah.
Do you have a little handout or an infographic or something that we would be able just to send to all of our advisees or to give if we're doing in-person advising, just so that we're routinely giving it to everybody, so even people who face-to-face say or virtually say, I'm good, it's fine, they still have those resources available?
It's a great point, Amy. I don't have anything right now, but that is definitely one of our like I said, this position literally started last week. So we're still figuring out how to get her like in payroll and get her email and everything. But no, we definitely will. And definitely by the time like fall time for advising begins, we will definitely have it. If not, I'm thinking early September, we'll have something ready. So yeah, we'll send that out for sure. That's a great point. And that's a great point, actually, because that way you don't have to necessarily ask the questions, but you can just give a resource to every student. And even if it's not for them, it could be for a roommate, a peer, anybody. So yeah, that's a great point.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, any other questions? Oh, and link to staff. Yes, Ashley, I will. Absolutely.
Christy, I had a question about the Swipe Out program.
Yeah.
I know that is, you're kind of still in development. So I was just curious, through that program, would it be available to commuter students who don't have a meal plan?
Yes. So this is a program that would be open to any student. I actually, many campuses that we talk to with the Swipe Out program, some of them say, if you have a meal plan, you're not eligible for Swipe Out. Now, I don't think we would limit it that because we have the 10 meal option. I think if you're a student living on campus with 10 meals a week, that is not enough, right? That's how do you sustain on 10 meals? So I anticipate some of those students may be students who are applying for a Swipe Out option. And so yes, this would be something that's open to all students.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep. It's funny, when we proposed this session, I was a little nervous because I knew that everything was still in the works, but at least now you have a sneak peek of what is coming. And certainly when we get all this finalized, whether it's Swipe Out Hunger or kind of Taylor's developing program and resources, I hope that you all will serve as champions for us to get that out to your colleagues. And we are happy to come out and talk to your department or your school, or I suppose Zoom in these days, Zoom into your meetings, or however the format will be. So yeah, it's very challenging, you know, with the incredible increase in demand. But then, you know, all of the kind of in-person programs that we were working on are just not feasible right now. So trying to figure out how do we fill those gaps. So we will continue to work on that. And I'm reminded that Jill is still here. So if there's any questions about the data too, or the survey. But, oh, I'm also realizing it's 10:05. So I understand if we want to just wrap up. So I couldn't see my clock on my computer here. So, all right, everyone. Well, thanks for joining. I will put my email in the chat box here if you don't have it. So if you have any questions, or if there's anything, let me make sure I typed that correctly. Yes. Anything that you need, you can find me there. So thanks, everyone. Best of luck starting the semester.
Christy, I have a conversation point if you want to hang out.
Yeah, please.